So today I'm going to be taking a look at my second Islander. This one is a pretty new model to the brand. I think it came out a couple weeks ago. Pretty affordable GMT, looks pretty good, so let's take a closer look. So we have a diameter of about 40.5, lug to lug of 47, height of 13.2, and a lug width of 20 millimeters. Some other general specifications for the watch are going to have the Seiko NH34 GMT movement beating away in here. This is a quote-unquote desk GMT, so it does only jump the GMT hand and date function depending on which way you're turning the crown, either up or down. So down is date, up is GMT hand. So I prefer that type of GMT. I think it's very useful and I like that they use it here. We do also have a gently domed sapphire crystal with inner AR coating, and you can tell the coating has a little bit of a blue tinge about it. And last but not least, this retails directly from Islander for $269. Starting with the dial of this watch, I think Islander did a fantastic job. I think the star of the show here is definitely the texture. I don't know if they have an official name for this texture, but I'm just going to kind of call it golf ball-esque. It has that nice little dimpling. It has an actual three-dimensionality to it, which is nice too. It's not just a surface texture that's very flat. It has a lot of depth and light play based on the angle you move it at. It's very dynamic, and I would say probably one of the best textures I've seen from really any micro brand. You can see we of course have the rectangular hour markers for each marker, which is kind of a weird marker style I've never seen before. It's almost like a flat metallic kind of brushed layer and then a borderline of lume around that. It's a very weird index in my opinion. It's not something like the C-Stern here, which has the true three-dimensional multifaceted markers that really shine and catch the eye. It's a little bit of a cheaper execution, and in a weird way almost makes the watch look more sporty and more flat for just the dial in general, because there isn't as much depth going on as comparison to the markers here. When I first saw this dial, I didn't love it, but it's come to grow on me. One thing I will say, and you'll be able to see it more once we zoom in, is that the indices are very rough. They have a kind of larger brushed grain about them, which to me doesn't look as premium, especially because the brushing around the case is so fine. But maybe it was a design choice. Maybe it grabs the light more. I don't know. I'm not in love with it, but I don't mind it as a full package. I think they did a pretty good job with the rest of the dial in general. Again, the texture is awesome. The text is actually done very well. It's three-dimensional. It's not just flatly printed onto the dial. We have the tiny little hint of red for the GMT text here. I think there's a nice balance between the top text and the bottom text. The GMT hand, of course, also pulls off that red color in more of like a lacquered type look, and I think looks pretty nice for the GMT hand itself. The fact that we have the 24-hour track on the inside and it is done in this bordered in circle, I think looks pretty cool, and it's just very visible in terms of GMT readability. And then we have on the outside the quote-unquote minute or seconds markers that are also done in that three-dimensional white layer. To be fair, it actually is loomed, that's why it is so three-dimensional, but I love the fact that even though they went with a lume that has a green leaning tone, it appears so super pure white here, and it doesn't distract from any of the colors on the dial. I love that they put the date at 6 o'clock, very symmetrical. I think it looks good. The funny thing is, I think the frame for the date window is probably the best metal applied thing on the dial itself, which is a kind of odd choice, but I do think Islander did a great job on the dial here. They went for something very unique, very different. This is the most boring, I guess you can say, of the colorways they've come out with for this GMT, but to me it's also the most classic, and based on how good this one looks, you can definitely go for one of the more fun variations, and it will still very much pop and look great on wrist or in a watch box. So zooming in on the dial here, and the case is that it does also look very good up close. You can see with that golf ball texture, I'll keep calling it, it has this almost concentric circling all throughout the dial, these like tiny fine lines that go in between, or I would say that cut into those little craters. And I don't know if that's just from the process of making the dial or if that's a design choice, but either way, it looks cool. It's not something you really see from wrist view, but it's one of those tiny nice details that's nice to see up close. As I mentioned, all the text is done very well in this kind of 3D bulbous texture on these little islands, no pun intended, above the dial there. I think it looks pretty great. It's crisp, it's clean. There really isn't any misprints. You do have like little spots there where maybe a little bit of the lume imprint is kind of on the dial track itself or something like that. But overall, there really isn't any major QC issues that I see. And focusing there on the 6 o'clock marker, you can kind of just tell how weird that marker is. It's not a style I've ever really seen before. It's a complete bordering of lume that is then like dead equal with the rise in the metal marker itself. Again, kind of strange. It's like an inverse metal marker where usually you have metal that's infilled with lume, but this is lume infilled with a metal marker, which is, strange. What distracts me from the watch is just how aggressive that brush and grain is on the markers. It's visible on every single one. It's the same thing for the hands. It just looks a little bit industrial. It doesn't look very nice and proper and quote unquote befitting of a classy looking GMT like this watch kind of really is, or realistically I think should be going for. So it's a good marker and it's serviceable, but I don't think it's perfect for the watch overall. Looking at the hands for a second, they continued along that same weird line of making a complete metal hand, but then putting lume infill in a layer on top of the hand. Again, something I've never seen before. It doesn't stand out as that weird on the wrist, which is nice, but kind of looking up close, it is a little bit of a strange thing. One of the better and classier elements of the dial, I think, is this beautiful red kind of cherry lacquered GMT hand. It has this nice glossiness to it. The lumen fill is done well and traditionally here. One thing I will note is this dial does use a ton of lume. You have the hands loomed, the GMT hand loomed, the end of the seconds hand loomed, the 24-hour track is loomed. So like this thing is very visible in the dark, and I enjoy that. I think it is something that they went, this is for the nerds, this is for the enthusiasts. I know they like things that glow in the dark, so here you go. And that's also a very interesting counterbalance. It's kind of like a little Mjolnir looking thing. I don't know what they officially call that, but that's what we're going with. So overall, good watch, like nice little details here and there, something you almost wouldn't expect from a watch of this price point. And I think all the elements come together to be a little bit more than the sum of their parts. So moving on to the case of this watch, and this is probably the most simplistic thing about the watch itself. If I bring in the C-stern really quickly, again, these are both based off the same elegance GMT styling and case shape. Where the Islander changes that is they make it about a millimeter larger than the GS or the C-stern version. So this does have a bigger stance, it has a larger dial, it has a little bit of a flatter dial too because it doesn't have as much of a raised marker. So it feels a lot more expansive on the wrist and would be better overall for larger wrist sizes. If you've ever tried on this platform of GMT and found it too small, this will be perfect for you. We also do notice this uses primarily brushing, at least from the top portion. We have circular brushing on the bezel, we have just vertical brushing on the lugs. We do have high polish on the sides. We do have a little bit of a polished chamfer and polished side to the bezel, which is nice to see. Just a little bit of pop of polish and finishing. And although there's no true chamfer along the side of the case side bows out just very slightly, bells out very slightly from kind of the plane of the top of the lugs. So you do get a feel for a little bit of hint of polish depending on what angle you're looking at your watch at. But I would have liked to see a chamfer there, especially since we have like a tiny chamfer along the inside of the lug, which is rarer to see. So it's kind of odd that they went for one on the inside but not on the outside. Maybe just trying to simplify the case shape, and I don't think it's bad as it is. I just think it could have had a more premium feel, especially since we have chamfers on the inside of the lugs and on the bezel. We do have a fairly good crown here. I would say it's a little on the small side. It could be a little bit larger, I think. It still has good knurling, easy to grip. The unscrewing of the crown has a little bit of a gritty feeling to it. It's not that refined. The winding by comparison is super smooth. I'm always surprised by the feel of this, quote unquote affordable GMT movement. It has a nice buttery kind of winding experience to it. Not too gritty, not too loud, not too screechy. Just a nice feeling watch movement. And the same kind of goes for when you're moving or operating the hand. Super buttery feel to the hand movement, very defined click and feedback to the date. Maybe a little bit grainy, but again, that can be forgiven for the price point. GMT hand, very sturdy. That is a nice feel. Not overly premium, but it has a kind of quality reassurance about it every time you click it. So nice overall operation of the crown and the movement. Screwing in does feel a little bit smoother than screwing it out, but it is not the best screw down crown experience. Looking at the side of the case for a second, it might be hard to catch on camera, and you can kind of see it there, but the side of the case is kind of split into two parts, a more flat, kind of bowed shaped top, and then a more completely curved and pushed in bottom that helps not only cut down on the visual heft of the case side, but helps just round the edge of the bottom of the case and make it wear really nice on wrist. It is a beautiful case shape overall, and it is just, I think, engineered really well. You can kind of just see from that case profile, fairly thin mid case. A lot of the height there is riding in the case back, so depending on how you wear your watch, it will probably sit pretty well into the wrist, that case back kind of disappearing and making it feel much more or effectively like a much smaller thickness. Looking at the case back, nothing to write home about, just that classic Seiko brushed movement that is not too fancy, but at least is cool, and you can still see all the nice mechanics in there. You can still see the balance wheel beating away. So it is definitely nice, especially if this is one of your first mechanicals. You do have a little customized rotor there done in a color. I kind of would have liked if they color matched it to the dial, or if like an element on the dial, like if it was black or red. I think that would have been a cool touch, but the blue, I'm not in love with. I don't hate it, but I think it's at least nice that they went and customized something rather than just a boring, stale, all-metal standard rotor with just Islander written on it. At least they did something a little bit different. To note, this is the original strap that comes with the watch. This is just that classic, quote-unquote, cheaper kind of genuine leather, but because it's fairly thin, it is super buttery out of the box. It has this almost nubuck, suede-ish type of top feel to it. It's not quite suede, but it has this nice soft appearance to it. It's matte. It is very conforming straight out of the box. It doesn't have quick release, which I would have liked to see, and it doesn't have drilled lug holes, which I would like to see. But overall, it's a nice starter package. It's not a strap you have to throw away right away, which is really nice, especially for this price point. It's very rare to see that. So I think Islander did a good job. So moving on to how this watch wears. Earlier, I was wearing my current favorite GMT, at least in my collection, this nice Timex Q GMT, which I think has a beautiful case shape. This is on a Casio bracelet. You can watch the review on this one to find out exactly which bracelet. I forget off the top of my head, but really cool GMT there. And there we have the Islander sitting on my 6.5-inch wrist. And as you can tell, I think it has a pretty large stance on the wrist. It's by no means too large, and it definitely fits. It doesn't overhang. It has a very constrained lug to lug, which is nice. So again, if you know you can fit a relative 47mm lug to lug, kind of similar to lug to lug as the Speedmaster and things like that, you'll know you'll be able to wear this on wrist. But with people with very small wrists, it might look a little bit too large and a little too overbearing, so just keep that in mind. But overall, really comfortable on the wrist. I love the way the dial comes to life. It's really the texture that draws you in the most. I don't get overly drawn to the metal-ish markers. I don't know what to quite call them, but it's really the dial that shines here and the color depth that comes from that dial shift. The watch doesn't rise too high up off the wrist. Again, it's a very comfortable and well created ergonomic case shape, and it doesn't really have any harsh edges. It's very comfortable and soft, quote-unquote, feeling on the wrist. So from the side view there, again, you can tell the case back pretty much just melts away into the wrist. Even me, who wears my watch up a little bit higher, more onto that bone, I don't have any issue with the watch feeling like it rises up too high. If I move the watch down just a little bit, I have closer to a 6-inch wrist there. And you can tell, again, the lug to lug is still very nice. It still doesn't overhang. But again, it is just a relatively, I think, larger looking platform on the wrist. So moving on to some other straps, while the original one is still pretty good, you can always mix it up and have a little bit of fun. This one is by Veblenist, which is a really cool strap that has the kind of waxy top layer that wears off over time and kind of makes this almost two-tone effect, this very aged look. I think it plays off the black tones pretty well. Maybe not a perfect strap, but I think a cool one. It adds a little bit of aging to the watch. I just like the look and feel of this strap overall. And yeah, I think it works decently well. Next, we have this super interesting purple strap from Has No Bounds. I wanted to put it on this strap for two reasons. One, because the strap is just awesome and it has this beautiful, almost cosmic feel about it, this beautiful bright sheen that comes out. But two, to show that this watch isn't perfect on large tapers. This is a 20 to 16mm taper, and I think it ends up making it look a little bit top heavy just because it is such a large face with large dials. So on wrist, it looks a little bit weird, but let's see. Not terrible, but again, I just don't think it looks perfect. This is more suited to a kind of 20 to 18 or 20 to 20 millimeter taper, so just keep that in mind if you're looking for other straps for it. Here is a beautiful fabric strap that really brings out and complements the tones of kind of the metal applied indices and that blackish brown you get from the dial. This is from, I believe, Strap Bandits. I'll have it linked down below. This is a 20 to 18 millimeter taper. Feels much more suited to the watch size and feel. So let's get it on wrist. Feels much more balanced in my opinion. Really nice subtle texture to this to complement but not overtake the dial texture itself, and beautiful kind of neutral color tone coming from that strap. And then of course we have a white silicone strap. This is just a cheapy one from AliExpress. Beautiful pure white, plays well off the Lume tones here, and is a very fun combo to add to the watch, and really nice yin-yang kind of contrast from that dial. There we have it on wrist. This, by comparison, is a non-tapering strap, 20 to 20. And again, I think looks perfect, balances the watch head very nicely. So just keep that in mind. Don't go for something super tapered because I don't think this has, quote unquote, the elegance to support that type of strap. It is almost like a weirdly sporty, dressy GMT that leans sporty but has a dressy look to it. It's in a weird no man's land, but thankfully it is still nice looking. And I think a lot of people will be able to see themselves wearing this style and this type of watch, because not everyone is as pigeonholed to pure dress watch love as I am. So yeah, this is a killer watch, and I think it looks good on this strap. Taking a look at the lume here, you can see it's very bright, very legible. Everything is loomed to pretty much the same standard and same brightness. One thing to note is even though there is lume pretty much everywhere, the GMT hour numbers aren't loomed, so you can't really read that. To be fair, I don't think you're really needing to know exactly what your second time zone is in the dark, and you can kind of probably guesstimate it based off the hour markers. But even then, again, good lume here. Can't really complain compared to the Timex. It's not overly bright. If I relume it, you can see much more similar. Islander's still not quite as bright, but still a pretty good job on the application of the lume here. So pros and cons of this watch, and I think one of the biggest pros off the bat is just going to be the dial texture itself. I think it was executed amazingly well. Again, I said it was probably one of the best textures I've ever seen from a micro brand, and I think that is just true. I can't really think of any texture that compares to it in any real sense. I just think it looks amazing. It comes together and looks pretty premium. It doesn't feel cheap or like corners were cut. Even when you look in the macro view, it still is a pretty nice texture with even more detail than you expected in the first place. So the dial is really just something special to look at. I do really like this muted black dial that I have. I believe probably the bright blue will be really kind of poppy and in your face, but not in a bad way. It is just a winning pattern that they found. Another big pro for me for the watch is going to be the movement here. The NH34, we're starting to see it used a lot more in the watch industry, which I love because it's a very affordable GMT movement. I love regular desk GMTs. I find them more useful than true GMTs. Maybe they're not as mechanically complicated or as horologically accepted or whatnot, but I enjoy it. I like the fact that there's a cheap version, and the fact that so many brands are using it is great. We see the AliExpress ones like the Seastern, we see Islander now using it in a very nice package, and it's nice to see a kind of commoditized GMT. My last pro for the watch is just really, I do think it's very good value. We have a case shape that's very ergonomic. It wears well on wrists. It's going to fit a lot of people very well. We again have a beautiful dial, a cool complication that you can't get always at this price point. Nonetheless, an automatic under $300, which is getting harder to find, at least from these bigger micro brands and some of these bigger brands overall. Now moving on to cons, while I don't have many, one of the bigger cons for me is going to be the markers that they went with for the watch. Like I said, I have never seen a marker style like this, kind of a flattened metal, maybe it's an index, I'm not quite sure, and then it's surrounded by lume, or it's on the same level as an outboard lume signature. It's a little bit strangely done. To me, it looks cheap. It's a little bit roughly finished in terms of the brushing that's on the marker itself. Is it as premium as a three-dimensional multifaceted marker? Not at all. Does it kind of let the watch down compared to how good everything else is? I think so. With that being said, potentially, I'm not sure if other people see it this way, but it could be seen as a more sporty styled index, and people might like that. People are not usually super into dress watches. It's a category I love, and this one kind of takes a dress watch feel and case shape and then de-dressifies it in a sense. So I don't think it's perfect. I don't think it's at harmony with the design, but maybe you like it, and if you like it, it's fantastic as a watch itself. But I just don't like it. Another big con for me, and this isn't necessarily with this model that I reviewed, but you can option a bracelet for about $60, $70 from Islander. And I just don't think it's a good looking bracelet. It's a standard 3-link kind of oyster style. It has male end links, so it doesn't really look good on the watch, I think. It's going to extend the feel and the length of the watch overall. It's already a fairly large wearing case because it's all dial, but if you add male end links to that, it's not going to fit a lot of people very well. I do think they could have gone with a better bracelet style. You could have put it on a Milanese or kind of a mesh styling. You could have put it on some kind of beads of rice. It just doesn't work for what it is. I understand that this watch has mainly brushed elements and then you do a fully brushed bracelet, but it doesn't feel right to me. This watch in this case shape, because it's so rounded and soft, feels best on straps, I think. But even then, I think they could have gone with a bracelet that fits this style more. One other con for me, and I know this probably won't be a big thing for most people, but the watch lacks drilled lug holes, or at the very least quick release spring bars. I think when you're going with a watch like this that can be, the classic term of a strap monster, it should be made to be able to swap straps easily. The Grand Seiko case that this is based off of uses drilled lug holes. The C-Stern knockoff case uses drilled lug holes. I'm sure it wouldn't be that hard to do on this watch case. And if you're not going to use drilled lug holes, at least do a quick release in the strap you put it on, just because, it gets hard. Some people don't want to dig and mess up their watch or have a specialized tool to be able to do it, even though you probably already have one. I think it'd be one of those really small things that is a minor detail, but it greatly improves the overall experience of the watch. But final thoughts, I think this is a fantastic watch. When I first saw it got released from the Islander website, I went, I'm probably going to have to order that and see how it is, because again, the value is there, the price is right, the complication is cool, and just at the end of the day, objectively, I think it looks good. So it is, I think, going to be a watch that's pretty popular. I think it's going to be a watch that can fit in most collections pretty well. It's going to be a great GMT option for a lot of people. I think where this watch also shines is in a sense being maybe somebody's first dressier leaning watch. Again, it doesn't feel fully dressy. It's still a larger style platform as well, but it's going to be much more elegant than a dive watch, much more elegant than some kind of explorer type feeling watch. It's going to have a dressiness about it. And this may be your first experience with that. It may be your first experience with the GMT. You might be able to knock two birds out with one stone. And I think that's cool to have. Is this a perfect watch? No, there can be improvements. Of course there can be, but there is no perfect watch. I think at the end of the day, you just kind of have to see, does this tick enough boxes for me, and do I like what I'm getting overall? And I do think for most people the answer will be yes, because again, objectively, it just is a good watch. Islander did a good job. It's very pretty. I enjoyed my time with it, absolutely. But I will say, I don't think it's the best watch they've made so far. I still do love their Northport Diver. I think that's probably the best watch they still make under their Islander name. But this is probably a pretty close second. But anyway, those are just my thoughts, my opinions, really my ramblings. And yeah, that's it for me. Just thank you for watching the video. Hope you got something out of it. Let me know what you think down below, and I'll see you in another one.